Welcome. I am Michele Leclaire, Executive Director of Buckham Gallery. Today, I am chatting with Danielle Mužina about her exhibition, A Reckoning in Pink, on view through March 18th. This exhibition may also be viewed at our website at buckhamgallery.org. A Reckoning in Pink envisions heightened parallel worlds in which women reckon with personal and communal agency amidst crisis and uncertainty. The paintings ask questions about the impact of gender performance and trauma on relationships, selfhood, and experiences of space, supported by the amplified intensity permitted within an apocalyptic setting. Mužina's immigrant grandmother, reflecting on witnessing national crises in their home of former Yugoslavia, told her to pay attention when the sky is bleeding, even if someone tells you it's not. These paintings grapple with the roles figures play actively or inactively, together or divided, in both contributing to and addressing internal and external crises. Before we start the conversation, I would like to say thank you to our incredible audience, whether visiting the gallery in person or viewing these videos online, and to all the artists who submit to our exhibitions calls. I appreciate you. Next, I would like to say a big thank you to the individuals and organizations who support the Buckham Fine Arts Project and Gallery, including the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation, the Michigan Arts and Culture Council, and the National Endowment for the Arts. The Greater Flint Arts Council Share Art Genesee Grant Program made possible by the Genesee County Arts Education and Cultural Enrichment Millage Funds. Your tax dollars at work. Thank you. Buckham Gallery is pleased to present the work of Danielle Mužina. Danielle Mužina is an artist and educator from Cleveland, Ohio. As an artist, she makes paintings that explore place, identity, and crisis, inspired by her experiences as a member of a family who immigrated from Croatia. She received her BFA at Ohio Wesleyan University, her MA at Eastern Illinois University, and her MFA at Miami University. Mužina has studied at the Jerusalem Studio School in Italy and also completed several residencies, including the Vermont Studio Center and the Sam and Adele Golden Foundation. Her paintings have been shown at numerous galleries nationally, including juried exhibitions at First Street Gallery, Blue Mountain Gallery, Bowery Gallery, the Untitled Space, and Prince Street Gallery in New York, New York, the Wascobb Family Gallery in State College, Pennsylvania, the Gertrude Herbert Institute of Art in Augusta, Georgia, and Verum Ultum Gallery in Portland, Oregon. Her current series was recognized with an Artist Enrichment Grant from the Kentucky Foundation for Women and the National Gallery Organization SECAC's Outstanding Artistic Achievement Award in 2021. It has been exhibited multiple times nationally in the past 3 years. She is looking forward to being included in John Zeid's upcoming book, Disrupted Realism, More Disruption. Welcome, Danielle. I am so excited to have this opportunity to chat with you today. I want to learn more about you and your painting practice and your studio practice. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm super excited to have a conversation about the work.
Yeah, you're welcome. I just love sort of the painterliness of your work and that how they sort of draw you into these sometimes maybe unsettling images, kind of like lures the viewer in. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so I like to start these conversations by learning a little bit more about you, sort of like where you're from, like your background, and what sort of led you down the path of art making.
Yeah, so I am originally from Cleveland, Ohio, and kind of what led to my interest in art was that my parents were still in school when I was born, so my grandparents co-raised me. I'm part of like a family of uh, Croatian Americans, and my grandparents emigrated from the former Yugoslavia, Croatia, and they met at a displaced persons camp in Italy before they came. And my grandfather did illustration work before coming to America, where Here, he worked as a union construction worker, and then when he retired from that, he was delivering pharmaceuticals, and one of his customers worked at Sherwin-Williams, and he would bring home like paint swatches, and we would make little collages and draw and do watercolors together, and every day for lunch, sort of, and we had this sort of shared language between us that was really beautiful and definitely spurred my interest in art. And I think too, living my early years in like a bilingual household, but having this like shared nonverbal language with my grandfather through art, really made me feel like it was a way that I could translate all of the things I notice in the world, in a way I could share with others, especially too, I think like reflecting back, like as a neurodivergent person who I think I sometimes am struggling to make sense of going on, but also noticing a lot at the same time. Painting became a way of like processing what was around me and helps me make sense of everything I like feel and see, and also gives me a way to start a dialogue with others in that sense of being a shared language. So yeah, like it's very life sustaining for me, and connected to some core like family memories
Yeah.
too.
So they must have been very supportive of you going into visual art fields in college then.
Well, I mean,
'Cause-
I so I guess like that's layered, right? So they've
right?
always they always appreciated my interest in that, but also being part of an immigrant family, there's a lot of pressure to, do something more like be a doctor, a lawyer, or something that is like, but I took the challenge upon myself to surprise my family with what I could achieve in the field and make them proud, even if they were a little bit worried about like my security and stuff over time. So it was,
Yeah.
yeah, it was like a slow reveal that I was going to be an art major for real, for real. So yeah,
I love that. It was a slow reveal.
yeah. Like, Dad, listen. Yeah. I think my dad was more like freaked out when I like came out as an art major than when I came out as a lesbian. So like I'll put it that way.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. I was like,
I mean, but also that's beautiful too,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And yeah. Oh.
yeah,
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing
yeah,
that background. I love hearing that. So I love your title, A Reckoning in Pink, and I was wondering if you would talk a little bit about, how besides well, I guess how it relates to the work and how you chose it for this body of work.
yeah. Sure. So the body of work, A Reckoning in Pink, is part of a larger series called Pink Apocalypse, where I'm really imagining these like heightened parallel worlds where women are reckoning with personal and communal agency while the environment is really turbulent. Pretty similar to what we are going through in like real life,
Yeah.
with like being part of both like what feels like both political and environmental apocalypses. But kind of what set off the series in general too was Dr. Blasey Ford's testimony as a survivor and the Me Too movement in general, where lots of women and others, but a lot of women speaking out about their survivorship really inspired me to feel more open to talking about that in my work, especially as survivorship like intersects with my like queer femme identity. And so there's sort of this national reckoning with, you know, survivorship, that has been going on amidst so many other reckonings. And my previous work was more like set to my like how gender roles played out in my domestic sphere, and I started becoming more, I guess, less insular and more interested too in like how my direct experiences intersect with broader things that impact, you know, like the family unit. So characters are sort of on the precipice of like the, you know, domestic frontier, and they're like responding to this apocalyptic turn of events where the sky is turning pink, or pink patterns are proliferating the air, and they all seem to be preparing themselves for the changes, whether they're wanted or unwanted. Some characters have these strange pink or magenta wounds, and the characters' responses in groups vary in ways where sometimes there are tensions between them, and sometimes they're really working towards solidarity. And so I'm really thinking about the ways that we all, like as individuals and as groups, contribute to addressing both like internal and external crises. So, you know, like as we witness like the like political and environmental threats play out, like we're responsible for like our internal responses as well as our outward responses. And I guess like, you know, sometimes things for me like trigger different responses that happen in the news, and I'm sort of like reckoning with that internally, but also in communities. And I guess the paintings give space for problem solving between individuals and groups of women, and I'm really just like trying to ask questions about also like for me specifically how gender and gender performance and trauma impact how my responses vary, and how I think that I can further develop my own agency, and envision, you know, spaces where we can all collaborate through these kind of turbulent times together, especially as women with lots of room to go in terms of like being responsible for each other, even amidst differences in identity as well.
Yeah, well, there's so much things just in that
Yeah,
that we have to delve into
so much.
and lead into several of the questions that I have prepared. But I just wanted to say how much I love that this is almost a direct response, and working with these um, really hard subjects and topics, you know, and being able to, you know, sure, Dr. Blasey, you respond for Blasey for, excuse me. You were inspired by that, and just her coming out on, you know, the podium and sharing what had happened to her so many years before. And I don't know, I am so, I don't, what's the word I'm looking for? Um, in awe of people who can so openly talk about these things that are so many of us are carrying as pain, you know, and inside. And that I know, like personally, I tend to like shut down. Like it's just like I can't. How do you talk about these things out loud?
Right.
Yeah. So anyways, I think that is amazing and beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's wild because like there's so much, you know, for so long there's been so much shame in some ways, or stigma, as well as, you know, just traditions of staying silent in certain ways, and like witnessing everything unfold like made me feel like, okay, like me talking about this might give other people like feelings of strength or like wanting to take action, because when other people did that for me, like it changed me and what I felt like I was able to say or use my voice to do, for sure. So yeah, but it's wild because it's also so stressful in other ways, like, you know.
I know. And then to have, like, I can imagine like if this was like an MFA thesis or something and having to stand in front of it, you know, in person. So it's one thing to work through these issues in the privacy of a studio, but then to then stand up in front of them and defend the work. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's huge.
yeah, because like
Yeah.
people, and you know, I never like talk in any specifics about anything that I've gone through or anything like that, but you know, people look at you in this way when you're up there, and they're kind of like, you know, there's all this conjecture that you can feel people's eyes on you, in this weird way.
Yeah.
But I just like steel myself and I'm like, this is like for a purpose. And I kind of like, I
Yeah.
don't know though, sort of also as an academic, I like do this thing in my brain where like I intellectualize it so that I don't have to like feel too.
Right, right. Because then
Yeah,
you have to kind of compartmentalize and
yeah,
remove to do that, right? Oh my
yeah.
goodness. Yeah. Um, so what is the importance of and serious side of pink?
Yeah, okay. I love this question, and it's a question that and a challenge in my work, I think, that comes up often. I really, in the work, want to challenge people's expectations of the color pink and what it can do in a painting and what it can do emotionally. Just like I want to kind of challenge the way that um, femininity is coded in these different ways as like always expected to be sort of soft. But and so it's like there's so much room in femininity for so much, but also we don't need to like negate softness or like vulnerability. Like they can also sort of be areas of strength to reclaim. Because you know a lot of the time binary notions of femininity can be oppressive in different ways for different people. Yet I also just really want to assert like femme power as and the feminine is something that is not just like for men as something that's like this thing of oppression under the patriarchy. It's like something that we can have for ourselves between women like taking care of each other and forming communities. And so in I want to challenge like why people don't take pink seriously, or I want to challenge the way that you know, when I first started teaching, I had, you know, senior women mentors that said that maybe I should try to dress less femininely to get taken seriously, even though, you know I'm an expert at what I'm talking about. Like, people sometimes have a hard time, like, with information coming from a person that's kind of soft spoken or, you know, wearing fake eyelashes and lipstick. And that's also tough in queer spaces sometimes. There's a lot of like femphobia that goes around. And in my paintings, I like to try to make pink feel like threatening and like really intense and like acrid. And other times it feels like nauseating. Other times it does feel calming, like, oh, finally this pinkness is like settling on this land. And other times it feels like it burns. Because I think that there are like different experiences um, within femininity itself that have different impacts on ourselves and those around us that can be both like life-giving and damaging in different ways depending. There's so much to unpack there. But basically too, like I believe that we all have the agency to choose like a fluid relationship to gender and to femininity that shifts to our needs and moods. And I think that I can take pink and give it the empowerment to be like critical and brave and inventive and challenge people's notions of like what's a pink painting mean and like what happens in a painting that's pink. You know, I had this instance where I had installed my work in a gallery and a man that worked in the department that the work was shown in was like, well, don't you think that the pink sides of these paintings diminish, you know, how seriously people are going to take them? And I was like, why? Like what makes you say that? Why isn't pink serious? You know, and I think if you examine that and say like, well, why too in my like feminine gender expression, like can you not take me seriously unless I like neutralize or masculinize myself? Like that's
Mhm.
on you. Like that's on us all to continue to examine like regardless of gender. Like I think that there's so much to reclaim and reassert power in there. So kind of unapologetic about it in my paintings, like breaking a lot of rules, putting sparkles into the acrylic paint at times where, you know, someone might feel like, oh, that's like a little tacky, and I'm like, where do you get your notions about like what's tacky or like what's serious in a painting? Like, you know, is it
Mhm.
like, you know, women's paintings have been policed in so many ways sent in all of art history, like from people's brushwork being critiqued as fussy, or as, you know, like thinking about the ways that other people have been accused of making paintings where they're cleaning up the way that their husband painted, in the case of Lee Krasner. And it's so awful and inappropriate. And yeah, I just want there to be space for women to make paintings the way that they want to paint and to do it in a way that's honest to them. Yeah, so I will always clap back at critiques of women's paintings that are also critiques of femininity, too. Like that painting is too diaristic or emotional, or the brushwork is too tentative. Why is tentative bad in a painting? Or you know what I mean? Like there's just so much that's heavily gendered, and so much to think about in that regard. So,
Yeah. Well, I was thinking about even while you were talking about this painting, and it is a very aggressive pink
yeah,
painting. And I tried to decide, I'm like, well, if there wasn't the cleaver and the bat, would it still have that feeling? I'm like, yes, it would still be a very in your I don't even know that those two weapons are necessary to give it
yeah,
that intensity. It is coming through in the pink and the stance um, of of
yeah.
of the women. Yeah, and
Yeah,
I
that
love it.
that painting too, you know, I'm kind of thinking about different aspects of like my internal identity coming together, that are
Mm,
often at odds, in terms of the two characters, but also, I guess, on topic of what we're talking about, you know, the moon, sort of like this kind of moon-like shape about to hit the earth. Also thinking about like relationships between women and the moon and cycles, and this like
mm,
bringing this massive reckoning to the landscape with paint that feels like it's dripping or like kind of violent in a way, as these women
mhm.
kind of accuse someone or demand accountability in some fashion, or yeah, it's kind of open-ended.
Can you maybe share a little bit about how you start a painting? You know, is it research or planning, or how much movement that you
hmm
see through the process?
Yeah, my process does at the beginning of a painting vary a little bit. Sometimes I have a really clear image of the painting, like that I just like wake up and I'm like, okay, yeah, like two women's hands in front of a wound that's like at the top of my head, and like that has to be the painting, you know. And then like I'll either set up a camera myself using myself as a model, or ask friends to sort of help me get that exact image. Other times I'm taking a lot of photos of like friends and family that I already have, and just like playing and sketching and collaging to try to like approach a specific feeling, or like the painting behind you is a painting like that Whisper Network. That painting I was really thinking about like making this like haven or like home base for this sort of resistance or like survival group of women. And so I was sort of like, you know, selfishly trying to pick out like all my like women friends that are so integral to um, supporting me, and therefore also supporting such a like webbed network of women, too, and making that make sense in this like long painting that's behind you. But a lot of the other times, like this one painting behind me here, I also do a lot of play with friends where there's sort of a performative element where like the pink apocalypse itself is like the motif or the like given, and we go and we're like, okay, like what would we do, or like what would this feel like, or like how would you respond? And so then like I give the people in my paintings some agency to shift the world building with me. And then that is really fun because sometimes things come up that are really specific that we wind up like taking photos of one another and posing for, and other times it just builds my repertoire of like other like photographic source material to sketch from and collage from, both like with analog methods in my sketchbook and like in digital kind of collaging and
Mhm.
playing with things back and forth. But then, as soon as I get to the painting itself on the panel, I tend to do a lot of invention, and things either stay pretty similar to the sketch or they move around a ton. Like something goes down and you're like, no, I feel like I need to pressurize something in the foreground. Or, what if like this pyre was burning behind us? Or like, what if like the pattern operated in such and such way, kind of responsively through the atmosphere. So yeah, there's like I think there's some planning and some play, but then like responsiveness on the surface. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. And it looks like even with your use of like the dripping paints and stuff, there would be some like just there would have to be some response from the mark making as well.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. So do you use yourself as a model frequently? Because we
Yeah.
had some picking through, we're like, oh, I think that one's Danielle. Now, is that a sister?
Yeah.
I don't.
Yeah, I use myself a lot. Sometimes, like, when I was living in rural Western Kentucky, um, and still building networks of friends and acquaintances for a time, like, I kind of just had myself and was doing a shift in the work away from work in the past that used a lot of like family photos and archives, and was just like, okay, this is about my survivorship and like dream imagery and stuff like that. So, I'm using myself. And then it started to become like me acting with myself out the internal kind of conflicts that I have about like, my queerness or gender performance, or like ways that I wish that I could, collaborate with friends or do collaborate with friends or could get justice. And so, yeah, like I kind of take on different characters. A little bit of Cindy Sherman influence in there, in the paintings process.
Yeah. So, can you share about the importance or meaning of the diamond shape and sort of this visual patterning that you use in your
Yeah.
compositions?
I think I'll start with talking about patterns in general and then the diamond.
Yeah.
So I've always been really drawn to visual patterns in a lot of ways in my work. And in the work, I use visual patterns to sort of like reference the cyclical patterns of thought and behavior that are laced into our real and perceived realities and lives. Thinking about pattern as something, a pattern of behavior that maybe you learned from a family member, or that you learned from gender norms, or like other ways that your behavior is pressurized. Patterns that we operate with and live with are interwoven with, both direct and indirect social pressures that impact both like our bodies and our minds. And, when I grew up with my grandparents too, it's a very, they kind of transformed the house they moved into here in Cleveland when they immigrated into this very Slavic kind of aesthetics, where they have lots of densely patterned wallpaper and like photos and paintings and trinkets hung salon style. So I did grow up with a lot of visual density. And pattern is something that I thought about a lot. And then again, like I think another thing too that is kind of under the surface too with neurodivergence is like pattern recognition. Like trying to identify patterns to make sense and also notice when patterns break. Um, and then also I guess like with trauma and PTSD, like noticing a pattern that reminds you of something that triggers you from a traumatic event in the past. Like, I'm always kind of like on guard, like trying to be like, oh God, like
Yeah.
this might be like this other situation. Sometimes it's not, but like the awareness of that potential pattern to play out is sort of with me. But yeah, so I really love too the idea of patterns that can be rigid and oppressive or infectious as they move through the space in the paintings, but also patterns that have like fluidity or patterns that carry meaning and significance and like um, a felt feeling of something positive or something that bonds people at the same time. And the diamond space specifically, so I feel like some of it might be a little bit like obsessive or subconscious in that like my grandparents had a lot of patterns that were like damask, or like jacquard, or how, I don't know how you say that word, like, yeah, like ornate diamond like
Mhm.
units.
Mhm.
And so I think I absorbed a lot of that. But also, the diamond shape itself is kind of vaginal, and has also been used in like images in manuscripts of like depictions of Christ's wound, which is also like, described as vaginal in historical texts in some ways, like his like suffering and bleeding being associated with the feminine, as well as like images of saints like Saint Catherine of Siena, like images of stigmata in the palm are like often diamond shaped. And I did grow up heavily Catholic, coming in from a Croatian family, and thinking about like as a survivor that if you that suffering with dignity, like kind of in silence, is like is like virtue for a woman, or like there are saints that are like lauded for their suffering that are women, a lot of the time. And I don't know if that's right. Like having a lot of hard
Yeah.
time with, oh, like, here I
Yeah.
am with my palms bleeding, like martyring myself for people around me, or like carrying like this, traumatic wounds with me from survivorship. But like, why should I just be here? Like, oh, it's fine. So that is there. And then as well as like, a lot of the images have characters with that diamond shape in head wounds. And I do also think about like images of lobotomies, too. So it becomes a wound that, I think a lot of the time, like as a queer person or a person that lives with mental illness or neurodivergent, like, oh, I'm lucky I live now, otherwise, I might be taken out.
Because this one, especially with the head wound, it does look like a vagina, and
Yeah,
possibly, and oddly, I thought episiotomy, except for it's not stitching it back together, it's just keeping the edges
just like
from fraying
open.
out further. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's keeping it open.
yeah, and yeah, the wound. Some of those wounds, it's like, you know, it's like they won't close. It's like, you are always carrying this with you. But she seems in this painting too, like I kind of am opening myself to talking about trauma and my experiences in the work. It's like, okay, like I'm opening myself up for science, but also a lot
Yeah,
of the time
yeah.
taking care of like women who like have gone through like domestic violence and stuff has been women's work, as well as like, um, past iterations of like taking care of like childbirth and stuff too. And so, thinking about that would look like in this fictional world. But then, the diamond shape too, like if you think about like, I don't know, and you can censor this out if it's too graphic or something, but like thinking about like experiencing like pain in your vagina that like has that shape or something, it's like I can feel the shape in my body. And so like on the painting on the left hand side, it's like I tried to make it like I tried to make the shape felt in the region of the body the way that, like an axe being resting on your cervix, kind of,
Mhm.
um with like the placement of that through that, or like pain in like your uterus like expands outward to your hips and like down, and so like it kind of feels like a diamond, so it's like a felt shape. And so yeah, like,
Yeah.
yeah, that's kind of where that comes from. And, sometimes there's weird stuff in your work where you're like, I can kind of explain it, but I'm still just like weirdly drawn to it all the time. Yeah.
Mhm. Well, yeah, you definitely don't have to explain everything. Wow.
Yeah, so that painting, it's like this figure is like sort of opening herself up too, and like in an intimate way, and being like, this is what I'm carrying, but a lot of the time, like that's so invisible, and like how do you say it to a
Mhm.
partner or to others, like and so yeah, I tried to paint it.
Yeah. So here we have that another one of those diamond shapes, and it's really interesting. I was really seeing them as like actually portals that they are kind of like reaching into with, but it's also I don't know, they're also holding on to it. I don't know the antagonist here, and where you this is one of the ones where you can actually see your antagonist as opposed to some of the other paintings. And I remember when you were here dropping off, we did speak about this painting briefly,
Mhm.
and you were talking about sort of what was happening with some of the Supreme Court rules and the changing of access to abortion. And I don't know, could you speak a little bit about that, or if
Yeah.
that was still thoughts you were having with this
Mhm.
painting?
Yeah, first I just want to say I love that you use the word portals, because yes, like also like it's an opening, right? And so like a lot of the
Yeah.
times too, when the figures have like power to like cast the diamonds, it's like they are able to use the casting of the diamonds, use like femme power to like open something else. And so that
Mhm.
is definitely present. But yeah, the figures are like holding on um, to all of the things I mentioned,
Yeah.
and to like their bodily autonomy and like their power essentially. And the figure in the foreground, my friend Diane, who's also my business partner, and was a former colleague of mine, a fellow professor. After the rulings went down in Texas, and we were like, this is just going to keep getting worse, and it has. And we went into the cornfield in Murray, Kentucky, and like acted out what that felt like. And my friend Diane was pregnant at the time too, and thinking
Mhm.
about, the ways that women's bodies are like policed and heavily regulated in so many ways. It's like this desperation for us to just try to hold on to that, and stand up as much as possible. And also, like we're definitely differently impacted by these things too, in different ways, according to our identity. And yeah, so Diane's husband and my friend Kevin kind of consented to be this like headless figure of the patriarchy that is messing with us. And yeah, it was a fun painting to do, in that I was so just kind of wrought about this idea of, Roe being overturned, that I started, incorporating a little bit more collage back into my work, or freeing my brushwork up a little bit more than I had previously. And yeah, it's definitely still something that I am thinking about a lot, for women as a whole in different ways, and like for our trans sisters too, with laws that are going into place, just so much like attempted control of our bodies and our bodily autonomy and our safety, in different ways. So I'm still thinking about that and yeah, and this isn't like that important to the painting, but I was trying to be a little bit cheeky with my Texas Cowboys aesthetic of like, the colors of that, and like my cowboy boots. So yeah,
Well, I noticed the boots. I didn't think about the colors.
yeah.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Are the protagonists threatening or attacking or even returning the violence of the often unseen
Yeah.
antagonists?
This is, I think, one of the most ambiguous, but for me also just rich parts of like making the series, because like that fluctuates depending on the painting and what's happening. And I'm okay with it being a little bit open-ended. Yeah, so some of them are definitely out for vigilante justice of some form, like going to confront somebody or going to return some sort of violence or get some sort of retribution. And of course, I have lots of internal questions about that, being like, well, is answering violence with violence right? But also, a lot of survivors like myself have revenge fantasies that are like, okay, like, what could I have done differently to stop this? Or I wish that I could have revenge. And also, like, I wish that there was justice for my friends and family, like, who have gone through things. And sometimes it's like you can't help the imagery that comes into your brain, even if you're judging yourself for it. So that's kind of in one way. Then some of the protagonists might not also be protagonists. Like there's this figure that is this 1960s dress, like Peter Pan collar outfit that she's wearing, who shows up in the paintings as both like a victim and a monster in certain ways. Like sometimes it seems like she might be a person who is also causing harm in the landscape. Thinking about how some of the ways that like my own internalized misogyny, or some of the ways that I will like overperform femininity to a lot of the time you do it for survival, but sometimes I protect my own privilege in ways that are inauthentic or that like hurt my queerness, or that still put out into the world this like brand of white femininity that is a lot of the time like not inclusive, or like perpetuates some things that are harmful if one's not aware of what they're doing. And so like that some of my figures of even myself are like the ways that I can be both like a victim and a monster and a heroine in different ways, due to the ways that identity overlaps. Yeah, and so some of the like revenge that's happening too is like between me and myself. Like the way that I am still negotiating like conflicts regarding my own like gender performance and my authentic voice, as I move through and interact with the world around me. And I think that that's important to note, that sometimes like in the painting that I'm talking about here, like there's a smaller version of me that's trying to have a conversation with this other version of me that's like, she seems like she's maybe controlled by these men that are in front of this like giant McMansion. Like she's kind of like, oh well, like if I stay here, like my privilege is protection and is protected in these certain ways. But these other figures are like, come on, man, like there's other stuff you can do, and that figure like changes and evolves, or merges with other characters throughout the series in different ways too. Like the painting we were talking about in the beginning, that's her with like the butcher knife with one of the other figures. And so even me too, like trying to re-understand, um like, or reclaim like femininity as in a positive way, while also still making room for other parts of myself that have been challenged by restrictive paradigms. So it's like some of those protagonists are like fighting against the threats to the landscape, the external crises, and then some of the conflict is like internal crises. So I think like there's like an important distinction to be made there. But I think too that some of the ambiguity in the series and its like non-linear nature is what keeps making me like stay in this world. Like, there are ways where I'm like, well, like some of the characters seem happy that like this pink apocalypse is coming, and others are like really freaked out. And yeah, like, is this ultimately what happens after this? It's like what happens next? Or like meanwhile, or 10 minutes ago, or 10 years from now, what else happens in this world? I think working in the apocalyptic setting gives me permission to be kind of over the top in a way that, again, thinking about the ways that women are called like hysterical or like emotionally reactive, like if it's the apocalypse, then people can go crazy in this way that I'm like, well, an average viewer would be like, okay, yeah, like if the sky was falling, then it would be okay to be mad. Well, like the sky is falling, you know, like the sky is falling in a lot of ways for women, and like we're not being hysterical. You
Yeah,
know, this
yeah.
is, yeah,
I was just gonna say, it's kind of interesting in using yourself as a model in multiple, sometimes multiple in the same panel, but also through the body of work. It has this sort of multifaceted because one is any one personality. Like we all have these
yeah,
different sides of ourselves, and so you are
yeah,
sharing that where you can be the monster or the caregiver or the tender,
yeah,
and even with the diamond shape, you think of the diamond as the different facets. So I don't know, it kind
yeah,
of it correlates all the way through.
yeah.
Um, and then you mentioned the sky is falling, and that was absolutely beautiful in your artist statement, as you said your
Oh
grandmother
yeah. Hmm.
had mentioned to pay attention when the sky is bleeding, even if someone tells you it's not. I mean,
Yes.
how amazing and wonderful advice and poignant right now,
I
right?
know.
Like,
Yeah,
oh yeah,
sometimes she
everything is
says stuff
fine.
and it's like an absolute like you're like, whoa, yeah. That's a zinger.
Yeah, and often it does look like the sky is bleeding. Your paintings
Hmm.
is just pink. Um,
Yeah.
uh, I love that. Oh my goodness. Um, Actually, there was one other thing, the phrase that I found from your artist statement. It was harnessing the apocalyptic magic.
Hmm. Yeah.
I do love that, and the power
Yeah.
that could be found in these moments of great challenge and strain to rise up, or what
Yeah.
that could mean would be different for everyone at different times, I'm sure. But
I
I,
love
I do
that.
love that.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
love that you pulled that out. And that definitely like corresponds to with some of our like discussion about portals. Like it seems like at certain moments in the series too, like the women are like conjuring the pinkness or like conjuring like a diamond opening. And yeah, I think like when we're in such acute crisis, like what kinds of what kinds of power do we come into as we respond? And like then also how do we share that power, and collaborate with each other's like individual unique powers and ways of seeing. So yeah.
Yeah, because some of the diamond portals that are being conjured are very solid and are shield-like in themselves
Hmm.
also.
Yeah.
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 So what are some of the major influences or people you're looking at? Like, are you looking at any other artists right now, or what are you checking
Yeah.
out?
So I guess like one like kind of obvious, really big influence for the body of work. I love the Artemisia
Hmm.
Gentileschi's paintings of Judith and the maidservant, particularly the ones where like I really like even the ones where like Holofernes isn't in the painting. It's like just Judith and the maidservant like kind of colluding. So that's definitely an influence on the work in general. And she opened doors for stories of women and survivors in her work by like giving alternative lenses to familiar narratives in different ways. And I really also love the very visceral kind of combinations of both vulnerability and resolve in like Paula Rego's work, Frida Kahlo's work, and then even outside of painting, I'm like two of my favorite artists of all time are Kiki Smith and Janine Antoni. Just sometimes some of the ways that they use the body, I really like vibe with, and I think are continuing me to ask questions about like how can embodiment and like how can I distort some of these paintings or make even weirder bodily things happen in this series. And one series that I really love that has inspired this is Dawn Malore's Death Army Dorothy paintings. There's this series of paintings where she reimagines Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz, like becoming a radical feminist and like causing chaos in Oz. And
Oh
they're
wow,
like really
I'll
they're
have to look it
funny.
up.
Yeah, you have to look it up. They're like
Yeah.
funny and campy, but like also like profoundly lonely and sad too. And yeah, I really admire that the way her Dorothy sort of like wreaks havoc with like gleeful malice and also indignation, and they're beautiful. Yeah, and then like just kind of formally too, I've always been drawn to Piero della Francesca's organization of space and depth. Yeah, like the way that he kind of gives complexity some structure, because I tend to be kind of a more as more person, and there is sort of like also too some like religiosity in some of the work that is kind of static, but still kind of builds in these window-like ways. And I guess also like painterly wise, I really love Fairfield Porter and Catherine Kehoe and Lois Dodd's kind of use of, bright, painterly, plainer painting in a lot of ways. Then I guess outside of art, my narrative probably owes some debt to like The Handmaid's Tale and to the Nancy Drew books that I grew up reading with like fervid intensity and their covers
Yeah.
even. So definitely that. And right now I'm really actually I think that Gisela McDaniel, who's a Detroit-based artist, is making some of the most important work about survivorship that exists. I love her work. And I think that I'm right now reading Legacy Russell's book Glitch Feminism, which is awesome, and I keep reading more and more about femphobia, especially the research of Dr. Rhea Ashley Hoskin and Andy Schwartz. And in my work, I'm still thinking about other ways that I can explore that concept. And yeah, so that
Yeah.
was kind of long-winded.
It's like, no, that's awesome. And
I
I,
did
I
for what you need.
was making a note while you were the Detroit artist, was it Janelle, did you say?
Gisela McDaniel.
Gisela.
Yeah, she's like an indigenous like Chamorro artist, and she's making these like really painterly paintings where like other women who are survivors and non-binary characters like they get to choose how their body is presented, and some of the paintings have this like auditory component where if you go closer to the painting, you can consent to hear them kind of telling a little bit about their stories, and like it's really breathtaking.
Wow,
Yeah. They've got like some collage elements. Yeah, they're awesome.
nice. I just want to make sure I got that correctly. Thank you. So I know that you moved recently, and that's
Mhm.
always a big upheaval and everything. But do you have any plans for what's going to happen next in the studio, or just more based on what you've been reading and influences, or any
I think,
thoughts?
yeah, I think just mostly I have more questions about like again, like I said, how can I break up the body more or like make weirder stuff happen? Because, as a pretty fairly traditional figurative painter for a long time, I think I like always had some hesitation about like going off the map. But ever since I started like opening portals within the body in different ways, I've been really curious about exploring that more and like what that would look like. And as well as thinking more about like some campier elements in the paintings or things that are like even more like slightly outrageous amidst the apocalypse, like the world is burning, but like incorporating maybe some like silliness or like cheekiness a little bit more into them as well as like the seriousness that exists as so. But yeah, I think that there's just a lot of room in for the series to move different directions because like what happened before and after the apocalypse. I think that there's just a lot of room for me to move around, and I'm excited about that.
And maybe they'll rebuild it sometime
Yeah,
to a
exactly.
new
Like,
world.
yeah, not just like how do we respond to what's falling apart, but like what do we build? So
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Thank you. Um, as a person who has sort of worked within the same sort of body of work for many, many years. It's always a difficult question to answer. I'm like,
Yeah,
what's next? I don't know. I just one painting leads to the next painting. It
yeah.
just that's what happens.
It's just a question occurs, or like you do something and you're like, wait, but what if this? And like I can't stop, like
Yeah.
so
Well, Danielle, thank you so much. This has been wonderful. I love your work and sharing it with our Greater Flint audience and those who view our exhibitions online. And this has just been lovely. And I can't wait for you to come to the reception tomorrow.
yeah, I'm really excited to like
Yeah.
talk to more people in your community and like thanks for asking such awesome questions and yeah, for all of your insights on the work. It's been very generous and I appreciate that a lot.
Well, you're welcome. And again, thank you so much to Danielle for chatting with me today. I just loved hearing about her process and really just all of the thought and emotion that goes behind making this really brave work. Um, and for sharing it with us here in Flint, Michigan. Also, thank you to you, our audience, for staying with us today. I appreciate you. Thank you.